Hey everyone, it's Mr. Cush here today with chapter 16 entitled The World Doesn't Love You. Before we get into it, I'll read you the little blurb that Trevor Noah always includes before each chapter so as to frame it and set the stage. So here it goes. So once when I was 10 years old, visiting my dad in Yeovil, I needed batteries for one of my toys. My mom had refused to buy me new batteries because, of course, she thought it was a waste of money. So I snuck out to the shops and shoplifted a pack. A security guard busted me on the way out, pulled me into his office, and called my mom. "We've caught your son shoplifting batteries," he said. "You need to come and fetch him." "No," she said. "Take him to jail. If he's going to disobey, he needs to learn the consequences." Then she hung up. The guard looked at me confused. Eventually, he let me go on the assumption that I was some wayward orphan because what mother would send her 10-year-old child to jail. So chapter 16, The World Doesn't Love You. My mom hated the hood. She didn't like my friends there. If I brought them back to the house, she didn't even want them coming inside. She didn't hate them personally. She hated what they represented. "You must be careful who you surround yourself with," she'd say, "because where you are can determine who you are." She said the thing she hated most about the hood was that it didn't pressure me to become better. She wanted me to hang out with my cousin at his university. "What's the difference if I'm going to university or I'm in the hood?" I'd say. "It's not like I'm going to university." "Yes, but the pressure of the university is going to get you. I know you. You won't sit by and watch these guys become better than you. If you're in an environment that is positive and progressive, you too will become that. I keep telling you to change your life, and you don't. One day, you're going to get arrested, and when you do, don't call me. I'll tell the police to lock you up just to teach you a lesson." There are some black parents who'd actually do that, not pay their kids bail, not hire their kid a lawyer, the ultimate tough love. But it doesn't always work because you're giving the kid tough love when maybe he just needs love. You're trying to teach him a lesson, and now that lesson is the rest of his life. One morning I saw an ad in the paper. Some shop was having a clearance sale on mobile phones, and they were selling them at such a ridiculous price, I knew that Bongani and I could flip them in the hood for a profit. This shop was out in the suburbs, too far to walk out of the way to take a minibus. Fortunately, my stepfather's workshop and a bunch of old cars were in our backyard. I'd been stealing Abel's junkers to get around since I was 14. I would say I was test driving them to make sure they'd been repaired correctly. Abel didn't think that was funny. I'd been caught many times, caught and subjected to my mother's wrath, but that had never stopped me from doing anything. Most of these junkers weren't street legal. They didn't have proper registrations or proper license plates. Luckily, Abel also had a stack of old numbered plates in the back of the garage, and I quickly learned I could just put one on an old car and hit the road. I was 19, maybe 20, not thinking about any of the ramifications of this. I stopped by Abel's garage when no one was around, picked up one of the cars, the red Mazda I'd taken to the Matrix dance, slapped some old plates on it, and set off in search of discounted cell phones. I got pulled over in Hillbrow. Cops in South Africa don't give you a reason when they pull you over. It's never about failing to signal or having a tail light out. Cops pull you over because they're cops and they have the power to pull you over. It's as simple as that. When the cop pulled me over, it was one of those situations where I wanted to say, "Hey, I know you guys are racially profiling me." But I couldn't argue that case because I was, at the moment, actually breaking the law. The cop walked up to my window, asked me the standard cop questions. "Where are you going? Is this your car? Whose car is this?" I couldn't answer. I completely froze. Now, I had run-ins with the cops in Alexandra and Soweto, but it was always more about the circumstance. A party getting shut down, a raid on a minibus. The law was all around me, but it had never come down on me. Trevor, specifically. And when you haven't had much experience with the law appears rational. Cops are jerks for the most part, but you also recognize that they're doing a job. Your parents, on the other hand, are not rational at all. They have served as judge, jury, and executioner for your entire childhood, and it feels like they give you a life sentence for every misdemeanor. In that moment, when I should have been scared of the cop, all I was thinking was, I'm in so much trouble when I get home. The cop called in the number plate registration and discovered that it didn't match the car. I stepped out of the Mazda and he put the cuffs on me, told me I was being arrested on suspicion of driving a stolen vehicle, and he took me in, and the car was impounded. At the Hillsborough police station, I was taken to the front booking desk where I was charged and fingerprinted. In the meantime, they'd been checking out the car, which wasn't going well for me. Whenever I borrowed cars from Abel's workshop, I tried to take the junker's rather than a real client's car. I thought I'd get in less trouble that way. That was a mistake. The Mazda, being one of Abel's junkers, didn't have a clear title of ownership. If it had had an owner, the cops would have called the owner. The owner would have explained that the car had been dropped off for repairs, and the whole thing would have been sorted out. Since the car didn't have an owner, I couldn't prove I hadn't stolen it. Carjackings were common in South Africa at the time, too. So common, you weren't even surprised when they happened. People were getting shot for their cars all the time. Not only could I not prove I hadn't stolen the car, I couldn't prove I hadn't murdered someone for it either. The cops were grilling me. You kill anyone to get that car, boy? Huh? You a killer? I was in deep, deep trouble. I sat there in the police station, arrested for suspicion of grand theft auto, a plausible suspect for carjacking or murder, and debated whether I should call my parents or go to jail. With my stepfather, I was thinking he might actually kill me. In my mind, that was an entirely realistic scenario. With my mother, I was thinking she's going to make this worse. She's not the character witness I want right now. She won't help me because she told me she wouldn't. If you ever get arrested, don't call me. I needed someone sympathetic to my plight, and I didn't believe she was that person, so I didn't call my parents. I decided I didn't need them. I was a man. I could go it alone. I used my call to phone my cousin and told him not to tell anyone what had happened while I figured out what to do. Now I just had to figure out what to do. I'd been picked up late in the afternoon, so by the time I was processed, it was close to lights out. I was spending the night in jail, like it or not. It was at that point that a cop pulled me aside and told me what I was in for. The way the system works in South Africa is that you're arrested and held in a cell at the police station until your bail hearing. At the hearing, the judge looks at your case, hears arguments from the opposing sides, and then he either dismisses the charges or sets bail and a trial date. If you can make your bail, you pay and go home. But there are all sorts of ways your bail hearing can go wrong. You can get some court-appointed lawyer who hasn't read your case and doesn't know what's going on. Your family can't pay your bail. It could even be that the court's backed up. Sorry, we're too busy. No more hearings today. It doesn't matter the reason. Once you leave jail, you can't go back to jail. If your situation isn't resolved that day, you go to prison to await trial. In prison, you are housed with the people awaiting trial, not with the general population. But even the awaiting trial section is incredibly dangerous because you have people picked up for traffic violations all the way up to proper hardened criminals. You're stuck there together, and you can be there for days, weeks, maybe even months. It's the same way in America. If you're poor, if you don't know how the system works, you can slip through the cracks, and the next thing you know, you're in this weird purgatory where you're not in prison, but you're not in prison. You haven't been convicted of any crime, but you're still locked up and you can't get out. This cop pulled me aside and said, listen, you don't want to go to your bail hearing. They'll give you a state attorney who won't know what's going on. He'll have no time for you. He'll ask the judge for a postponement, and then maybe you'll go free or maybe you won't. Trust me, you don't want to do that. You have the right to stay here for as long as you like. You want to meet with a lawyer and set yourself up before you go anywhere near a court or a judge. He wasn't giving me this advice out of the goodness of his heart. He had a deal with the defense attorney, sending him clients in exchange for a kickback. He handed me the attorney's business card. I called him, and he agreed to take my case. He told me to stay put while he handled everything. Now I needed money because lawyers don't do anything for free. I called a friend and asked him if he could ask his dad to borrow some money. He said he'd handle it, and then he talked to his dad, and the lawyer got his retainer the next day. With the lawyer taken care of, I felt like I had things under control. I was feeling pretty slick. I'd handled the situation, and most important, Mom and Abel were none the wiser. When the time came for lights out, a cop came and took my stuff, my belt, my wallet, and my shoelaces. Oh, why do you need my shoelaces? So you don't hang yourself? Right. Even when he said that, the gravity of my situation still wasn't sinking in. Walking to the station's holding cell, looking around at the other 6 guys in there, I was thinking, this is no big deal. Everything's going to be cool. I'm going to get out of this. I thought that right up until the moment the cell door clanged shut behind me and the guard yelled, "Lights out!" That's when I thought, oh man, this is real. The guards had given me a mat and a scratchy blanket, and I rolled them out on the concrete floor and tried to get comfortable. Every bad prison movie I'd ever seen was racing through my head, but this wasn't prison. It was jail, and there's a big difference, as I would soon come to understand. I woke up the next morning with that fleeting sensation where you think something has all been a dream. Then I looked around and remembered that it wasn't. Breakfast came, and I settled in to wait. A day in jail is mostly silence, punctuated by passing guards shouting profanities at you, doing roll call. Inside the holding cell, nobody says anything because everyone is afraid and no one wants to appear vulnerable. I didn't want anyone to know that I was just a kid in for a traffic charge, so I reached back in my mind for all the stereotypes of what I imagine people act like in prison. Excuse me. And then I tried to act like that. In South Africa, everybody knows that colored gangsters are the most ruthless, the most savage. It's a stereotype that's fed to you your whole life. The most notorious colored gangs are the numbers gangs, the 26s, the 27s, the 28s. They control the prisons. They're known for being brutally violent, like Mexican drug cartels. A lot of these gangs even have the same look as Mexican gangs. The Converse All-Stars with the Dickies pants and the open shirt buttoned only at the top. By the time I was a teenager, anytime I was profiled by cops or security guards, it usually wasn't because I was black, but because I looked colored. I went to a club once with my cousin and his friend. The bouncer searched Mlungisi, waved him in. He searched our friend, waved him in. Then he searched me and got up in my face. "Where's your knife?" "I don't have a knife." "I know you have a knife somewhere. Where is it?" And he searched and he searched and he finally gave up and let me in, looking me over like I was trouble. I figured that if I was in jail, people were going to assume I was the kind of colored person who ends up in jail, a violent criminal. So I played the stereotype. Anytime the cops asked me questions, I answered in broken Afrikaans with a thick colored accent. This was my brilliant plan to survive incarceration, and it worked. The guys in the cell with me were there for drunk driving, domestic abuse, petty theft. They had no idea what real colored gangsters were like. Everyone left me alone. The day of my hearing came, and I was handcuffed and put in the back of a police van and driven to the courthouse to meet my fate. In South African courts, to minimize your exposure and your opportunities for escape, the holding cell where you await your hearing is a massive pen below the courtroom. You walk up a set of stairs into the dock rather than being escorted through the corridors. In the holding cell, you're mixed in with the people who've been in prison awaiting trial for weeks or months. It's a weird mix. Everything from white-collared criminals to guys picked up on traffic stops to real hardcore criminals covered with prison tattoos. It's like the cantina scene in Star Wars, where the band's playing music and Han Solo's in the corner, and all the bad guys and bounty hunters from all over the universe are hanging out. A wretched hive of scum and villainy. Only there's no music, and there's no Han Solo. I was with these people for only a brief window of time, but in that moment, I saw the difference between prison and jail. I saw the difference between criminals and people who've committed crimes. I saw the hardness in people's faces. I thought back on how naive I'd been just hours before, thinking jail wasn't so bad and I could handle it. I was now truly afraid of what might happen to me. I looked around the holding cell, and there were easily 100 guys in there, all of them spread out and huddled, uh, all spread out and huddled into their clearly and unmistakably defined racial groups. A whole bunch of black people in one corner, the colored men in a different corner, a couple of Indians off by themselves, and a handful of white guys off to one side. The guys who'd been with me in the police van, the second we walked in, they instinctively, automatically walked off to join the groups they belonged to. I froze. I didn't know where to go. I looked over at the colored corner and I was staring at the most notorious, most violent prison gang in South Africa. I looked like them, but I wasn't them. I couldn't go over there doing my fake gangster act and have them discover I was a fraud. That game was over. The last thing I needed was colored gangsters up against me. Well, what if I went to the black corner? I know that I'm black and I identify black, but I'm not a black person on the face of it. So would the black guys understand why I was walking over? And what kind of mayhem would I start by going over there? Because going to the black corner as a perceived colored person might anger the colored gangs even more than going to the colored corner as a fake colored person. Because that's what happened to me my entire life. Colored people would see me hanging out with blacks and they'd confront me, want to fight me. I saw myself starting a race war in that holding cell. All this was happening in my head in an instant, on the fly. I was doing crazy calculations, looking at people, scanning the room, assessing the variables. If I go here, then this. If I go there, then that. My whole life was flashing before me. The playground at school, the spaza shops in Soweto, the streets of Eden Park. Every time and every place I ever had to be a chameleon, navigate between groups, explain who I was. I'd never been more scared in my life, but I still had to pick because racism exists and you have to pick a side. You can say that you don't pick sides, but eventually life will force you to pick a side. That day I picked white. They just didn't look like they could hurt me. It was a handful of average middle-aged white dudes, and I walked over to them, and we hung out for a while, chatted a bit. They were mostly in for white-collar crimes, money schemes, fraud, and racketeering. They'd be useless if anyone came over looking to start trouble, but they weren't going to do anything to me. I was safe. Luckily, the time went by fairly quickly, and I was there for only an hour before I was called up to court, where a judge would either let me go or send me to prison to await trial. As I was leaving, one of the white guys reached over to me. "Make sure you don't come back down here," he said. "Cry in front of the judge. Do whatever you have to do. If you go up and get sent back here, your life will never be the same." Up in the courtroom, I found my lawyer waiting. My cousin, Lungisi, was there too, in the gallery, ready to post my bail if things went my way. The bailiff read out my case number and the judge looked up at me. "How are you?" he said. I broke down. I'd been putting on this tough guy facade for nearly a week, and I couldn't do it anymore. I'm not fine, Your Honor. I'm not fine. And he looked confused. "What?" I said, "No, I'm not fine, sir. I'm really suffering." "Why are you telling me this?" "Well, because you asked how I was." "Who asked you?" You did. You just asked me." "I didn't say, how are you? I said, who are you? Why would I waste time asking, how are you? This is jail. I know everyone is suffering down there. If I asked everyone, how are you? We'd be here all day." I said, "Who are you? State your name for the record." "Trevor Noah." "Okay, now we can carry on." The whole courtroom started laughing, so then I did too. But now I was even more petrified because I didn't want the judge to think I was laughing and not taking him seriously. It turned out that I needn't have worried. Everything that had happened next took only a few minutes. My lawyer had talked to the prosecutor and everything had been arranged beforehand. He presented my case. I had no priors. I wasn't dangerous. There were no objections from the opposing side. The judge assigned my trial date and set my bail, and I was free to go. I walked out of the court and the light of day hit my face, and I said, "Sweet Jesus, I am never going back there again." It had been only a week in a cell that wasn't terribly uncomfortable with food that wasn't half bad, but a week in jail is a long, long time. A week without shoelaces is a long, long time. A week with no clocks, with no sun, can feel like an eternity. The thought of anything worse, the thought of doing real time in a real prison, I couldn't even imagine. I drove Mungisi to his place, took a shower, and slept there. The next day, he dropped me back at my mom's house, and I strolled up the driveway acting real casual. My plan was to say I'd been crashing with Mungisi for a few days. I walked into the house like nothing had happened. Hey, Mom, what's up? Mom didn't say anything, didn't ask me any questions. I was like, okay, cool, we're good. I stayed for most of the day. And later in the afternoon, we were sitting at the kitchen table talking, and I was telling all these stories going on about everything Lungisi and I had been up to that week, and I caught my mom giving me this look and slowly shaking her head. It was a different look than I had ever seen her give before. She looked hurt. What? I said. What is it? She said, boy, who do you think paid your bail? Who do you think paid your lawyer? Do you think that I'm an idiot? Did you think no one would tell me? The truth came spilling out. And of course she'd known. The car. It'd been missing the whole time. I'd been so wrapped up in dealing with jail and covering my tracks, I'd forgotten that the proof of my crime was right there in the yard, the red Mazda missing from the driveway. And of course, when I called my friend and he'd asked his dad for the money for the lawyer, the dad had pressed him on what the money was for. And being a parent himself, had called my mother immediately. She'd given my friend the money to pay the lawyer. She'd given my cousin the money to pay my bail. I'd spent the whole week in jail thinking I was so slick, but she'd known everything the whole time. I know you see me as some crazy old nag, Trevor, she said, but you forget the reason I ride you so hard and give you so much grief is because I love you. Everything I have ever done I've done from a place of love. If I don't punish you, the world will punish you even worse. The world doesn't love you, Trevor. If the police get you, the police don't love you. When I beat you, I'm trying to save you. When they beat you, they're trying to kill you.